Good evening. You are here once again with us at the Poet's Lighthouse on our 5th episode of the series. I am, as always, your host, Finn Bell. Pleased to be bringing poetry into your lives. Joining us is a poet from my very own Bay Area, Sophia Falco. Sophia has a Bachelor of Arts degree in intensive literature with a creative writing concentration in poetry from the University of California in Santa Cruz, where she graduated magna cum laude, along with the highest honors. She recently published her first full-length poetry collection titled Farewell, Clay Dove. Her poems have appeared in the Raw Art Review, the Poetry Matters Project, Wingless Dreamer, Tiny Seed Literary Journal, and The Beautiful Space, among other journals. Sophia also has an award-winning chapbook, The Immortal Sunflower, is a nominee for the Pushcart Prize and the winner of the Mirabai Prize for Poetry. Fellow sojourners, let's welcome to the studio today, poet Sophia Falco.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So Sophia, you had shared with me a few days ago what you termed your poetry manifesto. You began with the powerful words, "Poetry is what grounds me." Please share with us a little bit more about that.
So poetry is extremely important to me in my life. I once used the phrase, words are my savior on paper. So in regards to poetry grounding me, as an individual living with bipolar disorder 1 for over a decade, that sometimes makes me feel like I've lost some power to my mind. So the grounding factor of poetry is where one example of that, because poetry has so many elements, right? Imaginative, creativity, and then that leads to the word choice. I have the power in that moment to decide what word stands in the poem, what word works best. And with that, it may appear like a small act, but really it's an act of power. So giving me some power back to my mind.
That is beautiful. I like that poetry returns to you this sense of power in your life and in your mind. Thank you so much for that. Right now, we're going to pause for a brief break. When we come back, we will learn more about our guest, Sophia. Welcome back, Sojourners. We have the pleasure of having as our guest, Miss Sophia Falco, reading for us for the Mirabai Prize winning and Pushcart nominated poem, Farewell. Will you please honor us, Sophia?
Yes, of course. Farewell. When we parted, all the water evaporated from the earth's ocean, so only endless mountains of salt remained, as heavy as the moon, as heavy as my heart. On a pilgrimage in your honor to discover the tallest mountain, I traversed through treacherous terrain, while the sheer sun against the white hurt my eyes, and with every heavy footstep, my black boots crunched the salt, where the sound ricocheted from mountaintop to mountaintop. I prevailed by reaching the sparkling summit, then laid flat on my back and made an angel, sensing her spirit rising while witnessing the pinnacle of the sunset. Its pink rays like roses without thorns. Oh, how I wish I could have bottled up that for you. For the sake of freedom, I shouted, let it rain, well equipped with my lifeboat made out of driftwood. The rain did come, dissolving the mountains, and I saw a reflection in a singular drop.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was gorgeous reading. Sophia, in your poems, you know, like besides Raging Tiger, Rocket Ship, and even in Farewell, I noticed that you use the word red or some of its variations like pink. They make an appearance. Is there a potent symbol for you personally tied to this color?
Well, in the poem about Besides Raging Tiger, you can't just go asking for mercy after Kavith Akbar. I know we don't have time to read that one, but in regards to the color red, it says, I'm paraphrasing, but I do not touch red pens because they are cursed. So in that terms, it's a little bit dark, but red is associated with blood. So it's just a color that, I want to stay away. People want to stay away from. Not everyone, but just in that context, in that framework, that red is seen as cursed sometimes.
That was very powerful explanation. Sophia, in your poetry, think about one of your favorite poems and something that always returns to you, a phrase that always returns to you, one of the verses in your favorite poem. And why does it always return to you? Why does it persist as your favorite?
For my poem, Farewell, are you saying
yes,
as a whole? Yes. So in that poem is really important to me. So with poetry, you call them the speaker of the poem instead of narrator, like in books. So anyways, for this poem, I feel like it's not an external lover or anything like that. It's the speaker's former self. So in this poem, they're honoring the former self that has really struggled, has had a lot of trial and tribulations. And they're not going to forget that part of them because that has shaped them who they are today. So going from the macro, you have the ocean water evaporating and the speaker is like, okay, I really need to honor this part of myself. I really need to nurture this part of myself who has struggled, right? They're making the angel in the salt, not snow, but it's a salt angel. But anyways, and it's bringing it back to the micro, right? You have the reflection in a singular drop. So it's just, they're just always with their heart, in their heart. Yeah.
Beautiful. And the symbolism in a lot of them, I noticed that they are somewhere in between being somewhat cryptic, but also surprisingly at times they are right there. They are, present and very bold. If you look at them, where do you make that determination between the somewhat secluded and the forthright?
So I feel like in regards to my poetic process, and I view poetry as a craft that with each poem, it's its own journey. So I kind of use intuition and insight to lead me where the direction of the poem is going to go. So for example, in Rocket Ship, the metaphor is a little bit cryptic, not a whole lot. However, that poem started off with a free write and stream of consciousness, and that poem was in all directions and jumbled and just not making a lot of sense. And so after 2 pages of that, I decided, okay, what I really want to talk about is art therapy. And that was just a really tiny segment of this whole 2-page brainstorm free write. And when I said, okay, this is what I really want to say, then I thought, well, what metaphor would be best to talk about the feeling of disembodiment between mind and body? And so I thought, okay, a rocket ship is the way to go. So just the freedom to decide in that moment.
Yeah, that is a great and very illuminating answer. Do you find too that you get? I know that you said that your own poetry returns your power to you. But do you feel that there's also a sense of power or inspiration that you can find outside of you, externally? And where does that come from? Does it come from different art forms? Does it come from your external environment? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes. So we're already in June, but I think it was last August. I feel like in my personal life, the universe delivered me the ocean as my higher power when in a deep depression. And I've noticed when I was putting together my new book, I had a lot of references, small or large, like Farewell, which was definitely centered on the oceans, talks about the ocean. So it was just really fitting to see that a lot of my poetry and poems have touched on the theme of water and the ocean, and to bring it back to, okay, this is something outside of myself. And I feel like the ocean is so interesting, right? The color blue and the connotation, blue as in sadness, blue as the ocean. But the ocean will never leave me behind, and just that power and beauty. So if that has a rhythm to it, then, you know, I can find my way back to having, you know, rhythm back in my life.
That was poetry in itself, what you just said. I love that. Beautiful. Sophia, I know that you completed this debut poetry collection, Farewell, Clay Dove. But after the, you know, everything was published, the book was completed, did you hope in hindsight that you had included one other poem? And what poem would that have been? What would it have looked like?
So with my book, Farewell, Clay Dove, I found the order really important. With the poems I wrote over a span of a couple years, I took those poems and really had to work hard and think how I'm going to divide this into sections, section breaks, and what kind of narrative arc do I want, or if I want. So I did decide I want a narrative. So I start with my section, levitate, higher, suspend, revive. And with that said, trying to figure out the combination, I had 30 different orders of which ways the poems could be on the page. And after the 30th time, I finally figured it out. So Hourglass starts off the book with a tiny ocean in the speaker's bathtub, and it comes full circle to Farewell, which is the final poem, which I read about the ocean water evaporating, coming back, and it just comes full circle, right? Because it ends with a singular drop. So from the micro to the macro to the micro again. So, and I feel like it's complete, and that also leads to philosophical questions about poetry. Is a poem ever complete or not? And in my opinion, with my work, with intuition and trust, I know when one of my poems is complete.
I love that. You just spoke my language there as far as connecting with me about the necessity of having within one body of work a narrative structure, the continuous flow of it. So Sophia, if along that same line, if you had another poet whom you admire, whose poetry fit within that narrative, whose poem would you include?
Oh, you said if there was another poet?
Another poet, yeah.
Work who I admire.
Yes.
My favorite poet, his name is Kevith Akbar. He inspires me so much that he wrote, besides Little Goat, You Can't Just Go Asking for Mercy. And I found that poem so fascinating, and the structure of it, that I did a response poem, first of its kind. I've never done that before, but it turned out really well. Besides Raging Tiger, You Can't Just Go Ask for Mercy. So I flipped it right from Innocent Goat to a Raging Tiger. And that's where we go into the color red, cursed, and whatnot. And in fact, that poem was anthologized in the Be Nasty, a celebration of International Women's Day. So that was quite the honor.
I bet it was. You know, I feel like you answered this with, you know, with you gave your first answer about the more or less completion, you know, using that term lightly, because when really is a body of work ever complete? When really is a poem ever complete? But along that same line, do you ever go back and look at those poems existing in your collection, your current collection? And do you ever kind of nitpick over and say, why did I say this? What am I saying with this particular poem? Is there a poem in the book that does that for you?
So in my experience writing for about 7 or so years, poetry and trying out prose recently, which seems to be going well, I have thought I feel like it's a craft. So I found some poetry binders from when I first started out, and I was thinking, oh, wow, did I really write that kind of thing? But my craft has improved over time. And so it's for the utmost important. I would not put a poem in my book in which I think is not per se good enough or up to my standards. It just cannot occur like that. Yeah, so it, so when it goes out in publication, it's out there. So, you know, I feel like you have to be 100% certain, okay, this stands, this is going to stand. So.
Yeah. And what criteria would that be if you're willing to share that with us? What is the criteria that went into, what is the thought process that went into these selection and crafting this continuous narrative?
So it's interesting. So thematically, I wrote these poems in Farewell Clay Dove, span of it, like not a couple years or so, not too long, but I didn't set out to specifically write this narrative, write this book. So as it was kind of like a puzzle, jigsaw puzzle, I had like 35, 38 poems or so. And with that, I decided, okay, I need to figure out how to organize it with section breaks. And then I thought, okay, they're so thematically intertwined, these poems, that I can create a narrative. And so I ran with that and then landed on my order. But the kind of the basic gist of it, the speaker, so higher, I mean, levitate is where it starts off. That word is in Crimson Dove, that one word levitate, which is the section title. So yeah, the kind of flows. So the speaker is sort of like manic. In levitate, they're getting even higher, and the next section higher. And then suspend is when the speaker gets hospitalized and they're trying to work their way back to a stable mind and revive. So that's kind of how the narrative flowed. But I didn't set out to write this. It just came, the poems, and I had to, okay, this is collection, and I can therefore make it into a narrative. And that's kind of how it worked out that way.
I think that's the most beautiful way, that when things come together by you unconsciously knowing that, that you were going in a direction. And I love how intricate and beautiful even the title of each section was, and how it related to the poetry within the section. So a while ago, we spoke about color, how color figures, the color red, the color blue. Sophia, do you believe that your book in its entirety has its own color? And what color would that be?
Well, with my poems, I do reference colors so much sprinkled through each individual poem. So if we're talking about that, I would say rainbow.
Oh, that's I love that. Wonderful. That is wonderful. A last question about your book, your current book. What was the entirety of the loving process? What was the time frame of your creation of this book from beginning to end? Did it take over the span of quite a few years? Was it within a short period and it just all came to you? How did that go?
So yeah, this was not a huge span of time. Most of these poems, maybe 2 or 3 years, came together. I did finish the book last year, and through the publication process, different things came up, so we had to wait. So that's why it was released May 20th. But this was actually finished last year at some point.
Wonderful. Yeah, I wish I had something of that nature as well.
So, and it worked out though to wait, because I took the cover photo myself later after the book was done, yeah, at the golden hour. So that the photograph is titled "Birds at the Golden Hour," and I took this photograph near Santa Cruz.
Oh wow, yes.
I also do some photography, and I just thought the cover was perfect because of the light coming through the clouds, but still there's gray clouds. So it's kind of like you have both the light and dark coexisting at once, and that's really how my work explores that theme of light and dark. So it just was perfect.
So the photos, I noticed the photos are present on your website. Do they ever have their own body of work that kind of comes into fruition after you take a particular photo? Does that automatically translate into something at certain times that becomes poetry, and vice versa?
So I think it's interesting. I've had this before. Someone was like, oh, what if you create a photo book, like poems, photo, poems, photo kind of thing. But in my mind, for me, they're two separate realms. However, at the same time, how that intersects, how they cross is that the attention to detail. So with photography, I feel like the angles, the lighting, attention to detail is utmost important to get that shot, and poetry is similar, attention to detail is, I think, one of my strong suits. So they just kind of overlap, but it just was really fitting that I could use my photograph for the cover.
Going back to your poem that you shared with us, Farewell. How good do you believe you are at farewells?
It depends on the relationship. If you've known them longer, shorter, if you're going to carry them with you, kind of what the poem was alluding to. But yeah, farewell is definitely a time for change and reflection and introspection of the self and others. Sometimes can end okay. Other times maybe it's a little bit rocky. So it's just for each farewell is unique, I would say.
Very poetic response. Thank you. I would love for us to have a longer chat. I wish there was a lot more time, but I wanted to close up by asking you one last question to mull over. So before we conclude tonight's journey, I wanted to ask you, Sophia, who are you today? And who are you going to be tomorrow?
Let's see, that's kind of a tough question, but if I were to think about that briefly, who am I today? I would say first and foremost, I'm a poet. I would say second, that, I'm an empathetic person, a kind person, just a person who has really fallen and picked myself up, time and time again. So I would say, I guess I would use the word resilient, even though at times I feel like I'm not, but that's what I would say, resilient. And who I'm tomorrow, I try to aspire with that resiliency in my life.
That is, I think, a beautiful direction to go. And I do see it interwoven in the words and phrases in your poetry, that resiliency. It's definitely present. Thank you so much for touching us with your poetry and with your presence here at the Poets Lighthouse. And I want to thank our audience for tuning into the Poets Lighthouse today. Please learn more about tonight's guest, poet Sophia Falco, by going to sophiafalco.com and by following her on Instagram at Poet Sophia Falco 1, all lowercase and the number 1. Please also get your copy of her poetry collection, Farewell Clay Dove, available through the rawartreview.com. Please do not forget to show the Poetry Global Network love by subscribing to our YouTube channel and liking and sharing our videos. Have a wonderful evening.